Freakiness is a part of life. Original Barman along with the two bad, wicked youths of rap. Not a mercy, whoa.
What's the business? Talk paper when I'm riding by. They know it's drizzle, he the truth off the east side. I know who ain't got my money because they ducking high. I grind for me and mine. I got the green light. I got to get it how I live it. That means front line. I got them zips, I got that soft, I got that hard white. I got that.
Oh, what's up? Welcome to my show. I'm on my crickety chair today. I'm in a different room. Give me 2 seconds. I gotta look at. Okay, everything's good. So we're gonna start the show in just a second here. There's a live stream. An ad just popped up. I always keep my own videos on in the background just in case. And some dude's thigh just popped up, and it's like, what? But today we're going to be discussing why paganism don't exist. It does exist, but why it don't exist in no Europe. Or why it's not what you think it is. So there ain't no a damn green. You hear? It's over. It's over. I'm going to set a goal for super chats. Let's see. Share how you'll celebrate. I will feast. Start goal. Based in cringe. All right. I'm going to read some of the comments out. For those of you who are new, I am Gene. This is Moi channel. Today we're going to be discussing European paganism, Lar paganism, neo-paganism, reconstructionist, history of Indo-European mythos, difference between that and like Platonism and kind of high monotheistic philosophy, the difference between that and the biblical religion, and why neo-paganism makes no sense, and why you may not understand some of the history of Europe if you think that all these religions were these kind of organic movements and you had this high polytheism with these strange rural cults. You know, that was something that did occur, but it was really more of a minority position here. But looks like you've got a yarmulke on. Nice try, Adam Green. It's called a baseball cap. Welcome to America. But yeah, so we're going to be discussing those topics. Man, stupid ass chair. That's a little better. See, this chair, he behaved. That other one looks like some guy took a fucking bite out of it. So let's read some of these comments. Emmanuel says, yo. Foosnap says, love you, boo-boo. Don Manuel, if you saw James' Twitter, you would have guessed this stream could occur. Your cat is pagan? My cat ain't black. That's just a cat I found on the TV. He ain't no Bengal or Bombay, is it? The tabby. James in a different room to hide his location from attempts at crookery. Already commented on that one. Thoughts on people saying the halo is pagan. It's over. The Muslimin got us. Chance the Rapper. Hello, Gene. All right, let's just get into it. I'm going to open up the call pretty early. Or if I'm going to keep getting these Jew jokes, I'm just going to turn the hat around. Forget it. I'll just turn it around like this. Are we all happy? The Jews are not here. There's no Yehudai underneath your bed. I have two people making the Jew thing. 99 cent. Thank you very much, Luke. Urshman says, yo. All right, so I'll open up the chat. This won't be a super... I mean, this will be an interesting topic. I think you guys should be able to grasp this stuff pretty quickly. So we're going to open up a little touch, a little slice, a little do-re-mi. Comment allez-vous? We have some paganism. Can everybody see the paganism? Most pagans I talk to seem like LARPers. It says Friesen boxing. Yeah. Emmanuel, propeller hat. Tovia Singer says Christianity's idolatry. Well, good thing I don't give a rat's ass what Tovia Singer says. So if we take a look at this map here, all right, Shall I zoom in? How about that? No. How about this? Just give me a second. Yeah, that's not going to work. We'll just do this. I think you can all see what this map looks like. I mean, do you really need the super zoom in? You have various peoples identified here, Germanic peoples in the light red, maybe like the Sami peoples in the brown, or some other people that are up in Scandinavia. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Baltic peoples, conveniently not part of the Russo sphere. Germanic, obviously, we talked about, and then Celtic in green. For some reason, these guys always have Italic as a different race than Celtic, but that doesn't make any sense. This is why you can tell that this stuff is a LARP, because, first of all, Hungary shouldn't be its own thing if we're looking at ancient paganism. Now, if these guys are saying, let's take the modern borders of Europe and turn it into neo-paganism, the map makes slightly more sense, but it still ain't going to cut it. Because if you're saying Spain and Portugal are Celtic, but Italy's not, I don't know what kind of drugs you're on. Modern Spain and Portugal, which are Romance, Latin-derived languages, which are Catholic. They're Celtic, but Italy's not. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense today, and it does not make any sense thousands of years ago. So for those of you who aren't aware, I discussed this in a previous stream. Italy is part of the greater Italo-Celtic ancestral link. So other than, Sicilians and people in the deep south of Italy, most Italians can claim a Celtic or Germanic, but originally Celtic ancestry. When the Romans first invented Rome, most of the people in the Italian peninsula didn't call themselves Romans, and they opposed Rome. And these Latin tribes were themselves originally Celtic peoples. So like this idea that the Celts are just Irish and Scots and then Italian is its own thing. It's not its own thing. It wasn't historically, and it wouldn't make sense to divorce Italy from Spain and Portugal today. So we're going to talk about some of those things right now. And, I don't think I have to pull up the Celtic ancestry map again. I don't think, ethnicity has to be just done on haplogroups and stuff. It has to do with culture. And so Latin culture is part of the greater Celtic world. If you're going to make Iberia and France Celtic, then Italy has to be Celtic. This is why these guys don't make sense. They still see Italians as these like swarthy Mediterraneans, but they're not so different from the Spaniards, okay? Except if you go far south. You get far south, I know people are inclined to believe that Southern Italians are going to be like Spaniards because they're more Mediterranean or something. That's not true. Southern Italians are not more like Spaniards. Spaniards are more like Central and Northern Italians. End of story. It's over. Anyway, so this stuff makes absolutely no sense, and I'm going to get into why. So when you look at the gods, right, the old gods, let's look at these LARPers here. Got some Wotanists, which doesn't make sense because if they're celebrating Stonehenge, wouldn't that be Celtic paganism? But whatever. These Wotanists or these Celts, whatever these guys are, again, I'm going to conflate them because I don't care. Just like I would conflate Levantine paganism with Mesopotamian paganism. They're pretty much part of the same family. It doesn't matter. But this episode is chiefly going to be about European paganism because I think that's more relevant to most of the people in the audience and more relevant in today's political nomenclature. I don't see a lot of people other than completely insane people on the internet LARPing as Canaanites or Phoenicians. Okay, nobody actually does that. Like the Christians say that because they don't want to be called the Brown Era, but they don't really do Phoenician paganism. But resurrecting Celtic or Germanic paganism is fraught with errors because you can say, well, this is my religion, I'm different from the Greeks. But you're not different from the Greeks because even though you may not have the story of Odysseus per se, you have the same pantheon. Look at the pantheon from Norway all the way down to Greece, including Gaul and Iberia. It's all the same. So gods like Zeus become Jupiter in Rome. They then become Odin, the All-Father, in the Germanic sphere. And in the Celtic sphere, you have your own versions of that as well. There's always a father. You ever wonder why the mother is not the main character? Like there may be a goddess or a consort, but the father guy is always the main one, the All-Father. And he always has the beard, whether it's light blonde or it's white. The All-Father has the beard. Then there's like some brothers and like an evil brother. You have Loki and you have Hades. pretty much the same archetype. You have the divine son or apostle of that father. Sometimes as a son, sometimes as an apostle, as in the case of Odin, and then as in the case of Heracles or Hercules, he is the divine demigod son of this all-father character. So Zeus has Heracles, Jupiter has Hercules, Thor has Odin. All of these are based on the same Indo-European mythos. So what does that mean, the mythos? It means that there's a greater story at play here than simply the Greeks pulled Jupiter out of their ass and they invented a religion. That's not the case. Now, the Greeks would have been some of the earlier pagans in Europe, meaning they're some of the ones who develop this story more clearly. And actually, the development of the Greek pantheon is more impressive than what is, at least what can be recovered of the Germanic pantheon, probably just because the Greeks were able to write at an earlier period and they could record their stuff a little better. But it's otherwise the same story that's found in Germanic paganism. So for these guys out here saying, oh, the enlightened Romans with their Jupiter had to civilize the barbarous Gauls, they were more similar to the Gauls than either of them were to the Greeks. But they still have a linkage back to Greece due to the fact that they all believe in their all-father, then their ocean god, then the divine demigod, and then a goddess of this, a goddess of that. Now people say, well, wait a minute. Does that mean that paganism is fake? Like, what's the Bible talking about when it says to get rid of idols and gods? No, that is paganism. But the thesis here is that paganism, as you understand it, is not a bunch of European ethno-states coming up with their own origin stories. They have a common linkage. And so you see a lot of these neo-pagans will have kind of a schizophrenic idea. I'll read the comments in one moment, okay? They're going to have a schizophrenic idea where they have, on one point, hey, we're all our own, let's say I'm Adam Green or something. I'm of Norse ancestry or Germanic ancestry. I don't like Mediterranean, Sicilians, and Greeks. They can live in their own homeland, but, here in Germany or whatever, we do what we're going to do, like that Varg Vikernes guy living on welfare in France. So on one hand, they'll say, hey, I don't want to deal with these swarthy brown Greeks or whatever, that Macedonian Slav out of here. But then at the same time, they'll whip around and go, oh, Indo-European, Indo-Aryan race. But of course, they never want to be associated with the Aryans living in Asia. They're more associated with the Aryans being Europe. And so that presents a kind of a problem because you can't be exclusionary and super tribal and say, hey, dude, I just want Wotan and Odin and Thor. I don't give a rat's shit about Jupiter and Odysseus. But then you claim that you come from the same ancestral family. And I actually am inclined to agree with the pagans on this. So we're going to leave that up while I read some comments. Super chat from Anthony Rodriguez. Anthony, 2 USD. Thank you very much. He says, blessings. My comment is too long. I'll send below. If one is Orthodox, realizing the Catholic Church does not retain the faith as purely as Orthodoxy, how can an Orthodox Christian with Western roots, such as Spain, embrace the tradition of the West? Well, it is unrelated, but I have answered this before. And basically my advice to you would be, you don't have to become some Western Rite cope-larp, but you have to realize that two things are going on here. There are people in the Orthodox world that are very exclusionary, say everything in the West sucks ass and you should just LARP as a Byzantine. That's wrong. But then there's people who go way too far and say, actually, the West is just as good as the East and nothing bad came out of it. Both are wrong. You shouldn't LARP as Demetrius Anatolius, but you also should realize that there were some errors in the West, especially leading up to the schism, and that those are things the Orthodox Church does not and cannot accept. So for the first 900 years, most of Western theology is perfectly acceptable. And I would simply say, read church fathers and saints who come from the west of Europe. There are saints that are found in Gaul and Spain and Northwest Africa that would be in your neck of the woods. And you don't have to say you're Greek, but, you also can't just be universalist and say everything's perfect. There are problems that arose in the West, and there's problems that arose in the Middle East as well. A lot of the heresies came out of Egypt, Libya, parts of North Africa, and the Middle East as well. So there's tons of areas in the world where random bad ideas came from. Thank you for the super chat. I'm going to read a couple of these. Judaism, as per Tovia Judaism, his name is Tovia Judaism. So as per Tovia Judaism is true monotheism, and Christianity believes in due Trinity, which he says is unbiblical and not in the Old Testament. I've done multiple videos on Tovia Singer. Check out my videos. I have a playlist called Refutations. There's one old video from almost 3 years ago where I go line by line and give him the orthodox answer. Then there's a longer video called Orthodoxy versus Rabbinic Judaism, who follows the Bible. Then there's a third video, which is a refutation of his accusation that the New Testament is just Platonic paganism and stuff. So I refuted all that. I'm not going to give you free lecturing right now. Would any of these pagans have used these symbols referring to the earlier sheet? No, this is Reconstructionist. Hard doubt on the OG Latins being Celtic. The people who founded the city of Rome were a Latin tribe that were highly Hellenized, but they were not literally Greeks. People who say that Italians are just Greeks, the DNA and the ancestry and the culture doesn't support that. They inherited Hellenism, and that's why they said that Heraclius founded their city. But the Latin tribes were cousins of the Celts. That's why it's called the Italo-Celtic family. Sports Brand says, love the content. Thank you. SW, it's more about material archaeology, evidence, and cross-national culture links. Okay. Did a particular Austrian man want to restore German paganism? I don't know. I know that many of his associates did, and he was actually embarrassed by people like MMLER who would find little axes and claim that they found their long-lost civilization. Andrew, if you think it's a bad take, you're welcome to call in and correct me. Some of these pagans are woke feminists who think it's base that women get to be gods and kick men's butt. It's kind of strange. Okay. Do you believe there's archetypes at play with these similar pantheons, or do the stories develop differently? There are archetypes. Will the streams stay up, bro? I never take down any of my streams. Indo-Europeans have been reconstructed if anyone wants to look into it. Scotland and Ireland were found by an Egyptian princess, he says. Okay. Super Chat 5, thank you to Crooks. Some Euro-pagans try to reach out to Semitic/Arab neo-pagans who hardly exist by arguing that their gods are connected, like comparing Mot to Thanatos. All right, I'm going to get back into it. Last comment. It's funny how the ones who eat up all of this, the Christianity was made up later by Constantine, etc., are often the same who make the attempted reconstructions. Brian Stewart says anything that isn't Jewish is pagan, bruh. Well, no, because there's the sect called Judaism is pagan. So there you go. That debunks that. Jews are also capable of paganism. Everybody is. So anything that's not God's religion is either paganism or it's just a false religion. So in the case of Islam, I don't think it would be appropriate to just say Islam is paganism, like all the moon god stuff, like whatever. I think that's pretty low tier stuff. But Islam would be false, obviously, in the eyes of the Bible and Christianity. So it's a false religion. Then you have stuff like Zeus, and that's just plain old paganism. So anybody can be a pagan, including a Jew. All right. So anyway, if you take a look at this map, this ancestral map, according to the Old Testament, different ancestries of the world. As you can see, Europe is populated by people of the green names. So Tarshish, Tiras, Gomer, Ashkenaz, Magog, Javan, Kittim, etc. Those are Japhethites. So then you have Ham, which is the majority of Africa. Not Ethiopia, though, funnily enough. Ethiopia counts as Shem. And then you have Shem, which is really just the Arabian Peninsula and some groups near Palestine. That's really it. Now, of course, some people are now descendants of Shem who live in Africa. So Ethiopia, obviously, but also some people who live in Sudan, the tribes who are in Egypt and Libya and Algeria. So there are ethnic Arabs who moved to those places. So, you know, this map is describing what it was at that time period. There have been some changes. So, for example, the Gulf Arabs are not necessarily Hamites today. They've mixed very thoroughly with the Central Arabians, and they're, you know, culturally, linguistically, mostly Shem at this point. But anyway, as you can see, the Bible, way before any studies of Indo-European mythology and before we had archaeology, somehow it knows that all of Europe, the Caucasus Mountains, Persia, and into presumably Southwest Asia, so India, Pakistan, is all claimed to be Japheth. So it's distinct from Arabia and it's distinct from Africa. And you might say, well, that's easy. They're 3 different continents. Yeah, but back then people didn't know that. So the Israelites who wrote this wouldn't have known there's 3 different continents because it's not how they saw the world, first of all. Second of all, you could easily, just by an eye's glance, mistake somebody from Tunisia with somebody from southern Italy. So how would you know which one's a Japhethite and which one is a Hamite? I don't think you could just guess. You can't just point at someone and go, hey, that guy's Japhethite, when they would look very similar. Or how come a guy with very dark skin from the Gulf of Arabia, or some guy from India, for example, why are they called Japhethite by the Israelites? How would they know that these people somehow are linked? There's no way the Israelites had somebody from the Indus Valley, someone from Persia, someone from the Caucasus Mountains, someone from Greece, Germany, Italy, Spain, all in one room, and they could just compare all these languages. So this idea that they just got lucky, I'm not going to buy it. I think that this map is a pretty accurate. This map is not in the Bible itself. It's a kind of a reconstruction by Bible History Online, it says. But as you can see, I think the Bible gets it right. Like, Europeans are part of the same family as the original people of Asia Minor, the Caucasus, and South Asia, and Persia. And I don't think you could just make that guess. So what do you guys think about that one? Armenians are children of Ashkenaz, apparently, so all the Ashkenazi Jews are Armenian. That's why some Georgians say that. Do you think this ethnic map is a good proof of Christianity? Well, that's kind of what I was aiming at. I was saying that this ethnic map is a good proof that there is something special about the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, that is able to come up with the idea that Europe is the same family as Persia and India. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I lived on an island my whole life, or if I lived in ancient Israel or something, and I came across these people, they would look so vastly different, dress differently, sound differently, and eat different food. I would never be able to guess that these guys are all Indo-European, whatever that means. Persian language doesn't really sound like German dialects, and none of them sound like Hindi or Sanskrit. So how are the Israelites able to come up with this? There you go. Now, Doomsday Planet says Japheth and Shem live in the same house, Torah. Japheth and Shem are a mixed lot. That's not what that verse is saying. That verse is saying that Japheth will dwell in the tents of Shem. What does that mean? It means, yeah, there will be some cross-contamination, but it also means that Japheth will be the one to enlarge the tent of Shem and kind of show the world what Shem is giving people. So God speaks primarily to descendants of Shem, but then descendants of Japheth are the one who are really building the buildings, the churches, doing the councils, and spreading the religion as far as they possibly can. So that right there, by the way, is another proof that the Old Testament is actually not pro-ethnic Jewish or something. It's not just a book about Jews being Jewish and how cool they are, because they get talked down to by God all the time, who has nothing but insults to give them in many passages of the Old Testament. Meanwhile, Japheth is called, great and strong and will be glorious and more powerful than Shem for much of history. And then in addition to that, God's pretty patient with the pagans. He's harsh on the Israelites when they do idolatry, but he doesn't annihilate Greece for doing idolatry. He just stops them from destroying the Israelites in the temple. But he doesn't go to Greece and just annihilate all the Greeks. He's patient. God waits for the apostles to do the evangelism. So I would say that the Bible is pretty friendly to people who are not Israelite. I don't know where this meme, Adam Green stuff comes from. Where's our Georgian friend who can confirm if Georgians think that Armenians and Ashkenazi Jews are the same? That would be pretty funny to talk about. Here's another map, but this is pagan stuff. I don't know why they put Canaanite Kadesh here. I don't think that makes much sense. And if they wanted to do that, they should have put the coast of Syria and Lebanon there too. So it doesn't really make much sense. But, this is a reconstructionist. If they were going to do paganism again today, here's what they would do. So it's not an ancient map. This is today's map of these nations. And again, see what they're doing. They put France and Belgium and Spain and Portugal with Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, even though those nations today are absolutely nothing alike. But then for some reason, they just make Italy its own thing. And again, if anybody knows history, at least the northern quarter of Italy should be counted in this Celtic bloc. When Hannibal goes to invade the Italian peninsula, he claims that most of the people he's fighting on the way there are Celts until he arrives closer to Rome. So they are, in fact, Celtic peoples. Now, the further south you go, the less true that will be. But as you can see, it's pretty much a LARP. So I showed you guys the original map. Here's another one about the Ham, Japheth stuff. Kind of shows it a little better with the colors. So you can see that Central Asia, Iran, the Caucasus, all the way up into Europe, is all Japheth. Okay, so how are the Israelites concocting this when Iranians look more like us than they do an Irish person? Yet somehow Irish people and Iranians are part of the same descendants, same ancestry, familial-wise, culture-wise, linguistics-wise, but Semites and Hamites are not. Always found that to be very interesting. So that's kind of it. That's the majority of the quote theory that I wanted to give you guys. I will open up the chat now because I don't really feel like making this a 2.5 hour long stream. And I know that most of you guys are going to soak up the sun of this chat for a while. What about the peoples beyond the map? Says Cami. Well, who? Give me an example. Are you talking about China and stuff? Does Jeem, always screaming my name in caps lock, not know about American pagans? Yeah, what is that supposed to mean? Like pagans living in the United States of America today? Or are you talking about Native American paganism? And one other thing I wanted to mention to you guys, that some of you may not be aware of, is in fact that I also consider most paganism to be a bastardization of the events of the Bible. So not Jupiter and Zeus and whatever, not that, don't mistake that. But the antediluvian flood theories all come from a bastardization of Noah's Ark. Sometimes they confuse Abraham and Noah, and other times they confuse Noah with God. And so the God of whatever mythology it is causes the worldwide flood. But there are people in Native Americans who had essentially no contact with anybody. And if you listen to secular science, they hadn't talked to people for, 20,000 years or something? And they still have views of the flood. Global flood and their view of the earth is actually surprisingly similar to the ancient Israelite view of, the earth is here and you got the heavens above the waters and stuff like that. So I'm going to let the next person come in. A crook. How's it going?
Good. I'd say a lot of amazing points were discussed in this. For starters, I think it's really important that you touched on Italy was not always this Latin Roman place. There were many competing Italic tribes, I guess you can say, and a lot of Italic languages don't exist. That was a pretty interesting and important point to discuss, especially because, again, Italian neo-pagans, they're often not realizing that if they want to do the whole ancestor cry thing, they're technically submitting to Rome and maybe not to Venetians or wherever they were originally from. And yes, so one thing also that was discussed that I believe is important is that these pagan religions are still patriarchal at the end of the day. And this is important to discuss because many neo-pagans who are not on the right wing, the left-wing neo-pagans, they tend to often stress that neo-pagan faiths are more feminist, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But they don't realize that these religions still have a male god in the center, and that a lot of these women goddesses, let's be honest, they are clearly made up by men. You have temptresses, seductresses, really whiny women. It's like a lot of these men are clearly just complaining about their wives or something, or expressing their fear of women through these goddesses. And they're just learning about reconstructions at the end of the day. They fail to account that Christianity was also popular with women very early on in its inception, especially because Jesus, let's just say he did not have any issues with women, unlike, say, Zeus and whatnot. So that is something I'd say left-wing neo-pagans fail to understand.
Well, I like that you mentioned the whole Italian thing because, yeah, if you go back far enough, a lot of Italians won't constitute originally as Romans. Like, they do become Romanized, but if you wanted to be like, hey, I'm the pure original ancestor thing, then you would have to do either like a Celtic LARP if you're from northern Italy, or you'd have to do some kind of a pre-constructionist Latin tribe thing from the south. It's just very bizarre. It's like, where do you draw the line? When do you go back far enough where it's like, hey, now I'm the true ancestor? So that's why I always find to be interesting. And then if you look at this tab I have here, the origins of pagan idolatry ascertained from historical, I don't know why it's cut off. It's George Stanley Faber. And basically, it's his book showing that a lot of these idolatrous things come into the world after the flood. And so these are just retellings or bad memories of the actual biblical account. And so there's grains of truth in a lot of these myths when they talk about, oh, the world got ate up by this, here's this apocalypse or whatever. There are grains of truth in it. So, but that works against the pagans because it just shows that the original source material that gave them that, the events of the Bible, which, by the way, the archaeology matches with the biblical version, not the other ones. It just kind of vindicates even more that we all came from this post-Noahic flood world. So I don't understand how they're rejecting that. They just haven't done research on it.
That is actually very important as well, because I was also going to bring up that we have people who are very far removed from the Middle East still have flood myths as well, very similar to the ones that is discussed in the Bible. And even if we were to make this argument, oh, the Bible just ripped off all the Semitic paganism around it in Iraq and Iran or whatever. Sorry, Irans aren't Semites, my bad, don't at me. How do we explain Native Americans, Native Australians having similar myths? They're nowhere near the Middle East.
Right.
And yeah, also to one person in the chat, Jim, yes, I agree that the Italic languages in Latin are all related. It's just that Italy is a very regionalist nation. There's still this North Italy versus South Italy kind of thing. So I'm just thinking it's a little ironic that we're specifically going off one language that won over all others. And while many Italians can be really pissy about their dialects, or if their dialects constitute different languages, or hell, some of them even want to leave Italy, somehow they have to do ancestor cry. We are this unified Roman pagan Italian neo-religion. You know what I'm saying, right, Shane?
Yeah, of course. People are forgetting, just because I'm saying there's Celtic influence in Italy, that doesn't say it's not Latin. If you go again, if you read where these Latin tribes came from, they weren't just born out of the air. Like, there were Latin tribes living in the Italian peninsula before the establishment of Rome. So you have to go back even further, because if you're going to say, hey, Christianity ain't good enough, I'm going to go back 2,000 years to pagan Rome. Well, why don't we go back another 1,000 years? Then there's no more pagan Rome. So what are we going to identify as? That's the problem there. Now, the reason some people are going to probably go, wait, oh, Gene's just knocking on Wotan and shit. He's not talking about the pagan Canaanites. Well, that's because paganism in the Middle East and other parts of the world was actually a lot different. It was not as united. So there were a lot of local cults. Now, like the Levant and northern Egypt were just mishmashing with everybody else for the most part. But other parts did have their own kind of unique religions that were just weird, folksy cults. Whereas in Europe, there was a very strong semblance of these myths all coming from the same place. Doesn't mean the Germans copied it from the Greeks. Probably never met a Greek in their life. But it's a shared Japhethite, which is what Indo-European really means anyway, origin story.
Exactly. And speaking of Japhethites, again, if Armenians really are Ashkenazi Jews the whole time, you know what? If it makes you guys happy, I'll believe it too.
There you go. I actually heard a joke. This Georgian guy on the internet I talked to once, like 8 years ago. He's like, there's a famous saying in Georgia that the first Armenian was just a Jew that followed a coin into a church.
I mean, hey, that's a cool origin story. I'll believe it.
Just like this Ashkenazi Jew sitting there rubbing his beard, and then a golden coin goes rolling into an Orthodox church, and the Armenians are born. That's the origin story.
Exactly. Though it becomes a little cursed when you consider what happened to us in the world wars. But I mean, hey, we can appropriate each other's culture in that regard. And also So there's some very interesting stuff. And like, you guys need to realize, I'm sure many of you do by now, but you guys do need to realize that this whole, the East thing, like, even though Two Crooks and I get along, we have some cool stuff in common that we can vibe about. In the ancient Middle East, people didn't always get along. Just because Armenians and Lebanese can find similarities today, that wasn't the case thousands of years ago. So a lot of the Semitic groups had flack with each other, obviously, and they also had flack with the Japhethite group. So they didn't necessarily like the Hittites in Asia Minor. They didn't necessarily like the Armenians, and the Assyrians hated everybody and slaughtered their way through the whole region. So it's not like, you can just say everybody in the East are just these like swarthoids and they're against Europe. They wouldn't even know what Europe was. They were too busy being against themselves. Yeah, and that's not even getting to the Persians, who are also Japhetites, and their attempts to basically take over the entire region, because some things never change. Iran's still trying to take over the Middle East. The Semitic groups are are at each other's throats. The Bible pretty much documents this, and just things never change. And two more things. One to Adriano: is that why the Yahudi hate the Armenians so much? No, we don't really have a hatred relationship with each other. It's just case by case, I guess. It's relatively normal. We have a lot in common, a lot of differences too, but
Yep.
I can appreciate the similarities. And
SW says, I mean, this is delayed by 17 seconds, so I don't know what you're talking about. It says, oh, but I thought all Europeans were the same. I never said they're all the same. I said that the religion that they believe in and those pantheons come from the same root. And I wasn't even talking about Europeans. We're talking about Iran and stuff. So I was saying why those were different. But someone says, have you read into Fustel de Coulanges or Coulanger? No. What is that all about? But yeah, with the Islam stuff, guys, I don't know. I'm not inclined to do this Kaaba moon god nonsense. Like I'm fine with saying Islam is a monotheistic religion, but that still doesn't mean it's correct biblically. So we don't need to appeal to these weird moon god fantasies. I don't believe in that stuff. I think that's stretching it too far, and most Muslims will think you have something wrong with yourself if you actually believe in that. What do you think? Like, two crooks?
many Muslims will say, they've said it to my face when I was growing up in Kuwait. It's Christianity is just paganism because they think the Trinity is three gods. Granted, these were middle school kids telling me this because I was young and whatnot, but it's so much easier for Christians and Muslims to just say, look, we're both monotheistic religions. We both believe we are worshiping God correctly, and we both believe we have the correct take on Jesus. Obviously, I think, they are not correct, and they should join our faith. They think I'm not correct, and they want me to join their faith. But let's not do this all, you're actually secretly worshiping Baal or something like that. That's just getting crazy. And no, we're not attempts to revive neo-paganism. Yeah, your religion is wrong, but hey, it's still monotheist.
Yeah.
And that's it. Let's go
Now,
get
one thing that's interesting, and I do have to bring back everybody's favorite cast of characters here. So just wait a minute. You just wait. Watch this. Wait. Here we go. You guys are not going to be happy. You guys ain't going to be happy. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What is that, two crooks?
Plato, Socrates, Aristotle.
Yeah.
The guys who haunt your dreams.
They're back, guys. Well, here's the thing. I do want to point this out because I did a stream on these mad lads many times before. And you guys need to realize that paganism doesn't, it's kind of a word that means nothing today. So it was supposed to mean rural folk religionists. And that's what Christian Romans referred to as pagans. They wouldn't have called a highly cultured Hellenist a pagan, for example. But anyway, if we're saying non-God worshiping, so worshiping other gods or multiple gods or whatever, there's a really big difference between Greeks worshiping Zeus and Poseidon, and then the stories of Odysseus and the Iliad and stuff like that. That's part of that Indo-European, cross-contaminated pantheon, and that's just kind of basic stuff. The Greeks very quickly start to add a lot onto it. They make it very complex. That's why when you look at Odysseus and the Iliad, it really doesn't have much to do with Zeus and Poseidon. Those guys are not very important. What's important is Odysseus and the mortals and how they relate to the world. And so that's what makes those books cherished and elevated beyond just here's the story of Zeus throwing a lightning bolt or something. But once you get into the era of Socrates, Plato, and then later with Aristotle, Greeks have moved past this. They've realized somehow through their rationalism that there aren't, 25 different gods. And these gods are pretty similar in different parts of the known world, and they don't seem to be real. So there must be one God, or one cause, really, because they don't think it's really a god; it's a cause. And so these Greeks moved past this idea of there being multiple gods. And so really, you can say that Platonism is a monotheism because it believes in one cause, one deity. However, that doesn't mean it's justified or good. That's why Muslims need to drop the whole monotheism obsession with the number one, because a Platonist could just say, hey, I'm a monotheist too. Why should I join your group? And so Plato and these guys move out of there. They think that God is above and beyond everything. He's not even in reality. You can't even conceive of him, Plotinus says. Whereas the ancient Greeks would have said, hey, Zeus is literally on Mount Olympus. Now, I've talked about this many times before. The ancient Near East system also has some similarity to the Olympians in that they thought that the gods literally resided on a certain mountain. They didn't have to be in the heavens. They could be, but they could also be in a real land. They were the god of that land. And so when you have the philosophy come into play, it's the total opposite. And a lot of people don't seem to realize that. So they get all like, oh, everything's paganism, but there's quite literally some very big differences between types of paganism.
Yeah. And Jim, one thing that you also talked about as well is that many Muslims actually have a lot of reverence for this kind of Platonic belief by arguing, oh, these people received some form of revelation early on, and while they were not perfect, it shows that, the light of Allah was spreading, and they were so close to getting it right, which is funny because many Muslims think, again, Christianity is this Neo-Greek, Roman, Latin, whatever, pagan religion, but many Muslims early on thought, oh, hey, we're actually saving Western civilization, and the fact that our beliefs line up so well with this Neoplatonic ideal shows, yeah, we're totally in line with them. Why are our descendants suddenly saying being Greek is a bad thing?
Yeah, so first let me answer the super chat. Arakota says $5 USD. Thank you for that very much. Which person are Eastern Asians descended from Japheth as well? I don't know. So, I hate to waste your question there, but I don't know the answer to that. If I had to guess, it'd be loosely related to Japheth. But then remember, just saying people start with Japheth doesn't mean they're genetically similar. They can then have wildly different local admixtures. So just like we say, everybody came from the families of Noah, doesn't mean we're all going to look alike. We look vastly different. So in the end of the day, we all came from the families of Noah. But then if you divide that into three, you have Japheth, Ham, and Shem. And that can mean anything. So I see some people say, well, Ham only means Egyptians and Libyans. It doesn't mean people in West Africa. That's not true, because it says that Cush is part of Ham as well. And Cush was Sudan. And they're obviously black. And they had been black pretty much forever. So the Bible has no problem with saying a Mediterranean-looking person and a black African-looking person can both be from the same ancestry. It's not about what you look like. It's about that lineage linguistically and culturally. And that's why even more wider than the Semitic family tree is this Afro-Asiatic thing where Semitic and Hamitic dialects are even somewhat similar as well. So somebody could be from India or Ireland and still be Japhethite. And so that can include Central or East Asians as well. I'll do more research into it, but great comment. Another thing I was going to mention is that the reason I have these guys here, Crooks is actually correct. There are a lot of people, and by the way, the book, if people were asking, The Origin of Pagan Idolatry by George Stanley Faber. So if that's what you wanted to look at, by all means. But I do want to point this out real quick because some people just don't seem to get it. Let's see. Give me 1 second. I just like to get these images up.
Oh yeah, some people are saying that white people were created by Yaqub in the comment sections. Okay, but who made Yaqub? It was the Middle Eastern people, Habibi.
That's right. An Assyrian. What is it called? What scientists believe that the universe came from some third dimensional alien sperm in the abyss or something. So he spermatized the air, and that's where Yaqub came from. There you go. But in reality, Islamic Neoplatonism, we're a little off topic now, but I'm happy we're talking about this one, is a real topic. And a lot of the Muslims, and this is not some Turkish invention 900 years later, some of the earliest Muslims thought the Christians were being punished because they reneged on Western civilization. So not like Jupiter and Mars, but they thought that the Christians had abandoned real philosophy. And this...
Bless you.
Thank you.
Saha. You guys say that still, right? Saha when you sneeze or cough.
So yeah, I do. It's still an instinct. But what was I saying? Yeah, they thought that the Christians had reneged on real philosophy. So it's interesting because some of these Muslims, they were very philosophical, and they would, as Two Crooks said, agree that Plato and these other guys received some element of truth. Now, I say some Muslims because if you ask the Salafis today, they'll say that's all bid'ah garbage and it doesn't belong in Islam. But it's there in some early Muslims as well. So it's interesting how that was ascertained. And you can see how Muslims are basically saying, all the wrong religions believe in these like physical clay gods, but we have the transcendental monad. That's not all Muslims. It's just the ones who happen to believe in that. Everyone's saying bless you. Thank you very much, guys. The mascots of the channel. Nick. Okay, guys, I don't know if I didn't put it in the pin. That's my bad. There's the link. I forgot to pin it. Damn. Crooks.
All right.
Do some riffing for a minute while I pin the comment.
Okay, so one guy's saying the Lebanese are Yaqub's finest invention. I did notice on the map that Phoenicia is labeled as Japhet or something, which would probably make them the token, Japhet's in the Levant, I would assume. Unfortunately, this means the ego of the Maronites is going to inflate 1,000% because they want to be super white or whatever.
Actually, and this one, the more accurate one will say that Canaan was Hamite, not Japhethite. So, looks like we was part of Egypt, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and apparently the I made a mistake. I was assuming it was Phoenicians, but nope, it's actually... Yeah, Philistia is the ones who Japhet. So the Palestinians are white. Get it?
That's right. Palestinians are white. Actually, no, just Gaza. Just Gaza's white. Everything else is brown and swarthy and gross, but Gaza's white.
Yeah, I misread the map. It's Philistia, not Phoenicia. But yeah, oh my God, Gaza's white. Holy shit.
Based Maronites. Okay. Joey says, you mentioned him in your book. And by the way, Joey, thank you for reading the book. You mentioned him in your book. Which school is Dr. Shabir Ali? He believes the Quran teaches the preexistence of the nafs, but he says that can't be the case scientifically. So Shabir Ali's kind of a modernist, and I do mention that in the book as well. Like, he would not be welcome to do some kind of a talk in Saudi Arabia, for instance. But I believe he follows the Hanafi school because he's of South Asian origin, and most people of South Asian origin follow the Hanafi school. I'm just making an assumption. And it would make the most sense based on the way he talks, because you can, if you're living in a diaspora, you can pull off liberalism, maybe if you're in the Hanafi jurisprudence, but still, if you're saying what school of thought in terms of philosophy, he would definitely be more in the Ash'ari thought. So he doesn't necessarily like Plato and stuff, but I don't see him believing in the physical God stuff that the Salafis do. If I'm wrong on that, someone correct me. But in any way, he says that the Quran teaches some kind of pre-existence of soul, and says it can't be the case. So he's really just trying to do some redaction. He's saying we're interpreting the Quran wrong. The Hadith and all the sources, I believe, when I quote him, is what he's talking about. So Shabir Ali is not really saying the Quran itself, but the Hadith and all the later stuff has this weird Platonism, and he thinks it's a problem. He's definitely a very a modernist guy. Anyway, let's get out of this image for a second. I have pinned it. I have pinned the comment. So if you guys would like to join, I think now is the time.
At this point, I believe your chat just likes seeing two Lebanese people talk because they probably don't run into too many people from our side of the world in their daily lives.
Oh, not so fast. We have our friend from Indonesia here. How's it going?
Hi. Sorry, I didn't quite catch the stream, and I have to go soon. I'm just taking a quick break from work. So I'm just gonna ask this. You always talk a lot in your channel about you shouldn't be spending all day learning philosophy and theology. It can be a big waste of time when really it could just be much simpler. Well, I'm gonna ask you this then. Would this be a good way of living a good life by a Christian standard? You go to church every Sunday, you help your community, you do your prayers, and you generally try to help your community, I mean, that would be sufficient, right?
I mean, as long as they had good beliefs as well. Like, they can't believe total heresy. But yeah, that would be considered a good system to do what you said, but as the Bible describes it. So not just your own version, but what the Bible says to do then yes.
Yeah, okay, I guess. Okay, then the question is this: do you think that with a Christian belief system, what a good life looks like would be different from what humans would instinctively understand?
um, Different than what humans would instinctively understand. Not vastly otherworldly, but it would be different from what humans instinctively understand, as a matter of fact. Because the Bible has quite a few, not quite a few, I mean, a large chunk of the Bible is very strict rules on not just basic stuff like morality, like don't murder, but in terms of behavior on, let's just say, certain bodily fluids, sexual hygiene, spiritual hygiene. I don't think there's human instinct tells us that we should feel shame for doing something sexual. But if we learn that God is against a certain act being prohibited, then we learn by revelation that is bad. But to be honest with you, I don't think naturally people know that. Again, I'm trying to be careful because we're on my channel live. Certain sexual acts are bad in and of themselves. Because if they knew that, they wouldn't have done it. Just like there's this argument that I've seen some atheists pull up saying there is no objective morality because, instinctively, or maybe it wasn't about objective morality, but they were saying naturally we know that it's bad to harm infants. And I was like, well, that's not the case because there's so many societies that have and continue to harm babies. So I don't believe in this overt natural stuff, if that's what you're asking, natural law.
Yeah, thank you. I'll look into it because Catholics are big on that, right?
Catholics are huge on that because of Aristotle and Aquinas, and this is my biggest gripe with Catholics, is this putting all of their eggs in the basket of just a couple of people. Now, to be fair, there are Franciscans who don't really like Aquinas. That's whatever, that's fine. But the average Catholic and the vast majority of Catholic theology, which comes from the decrees of the popes and is inputted into all of the churches historically, has been what you could call the Dominican rite. So that means from Thomas Aquinas. And yeah, I think that's one of my biggest gripes, is this obsession with like 2 or 3 figures instead of an array of a school of thought.
All right, great. I'll rewatch the stream later when I get back home from work. This is going to be interesting. Thanks a lot,
Cool.
man.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for calling in. Oh, he's gone. Great question. Our friend Ahmed, for some of you who may not come on here that much, is from Indonesia. I don't know if I want to call him an ex-Muslim, but he's kind of in the middle between looking at different religions and has a lot of interesting questions. So he was asking me about natural law. Hang on, let's show us our true forms here.
Sure.
But he has some great commentary, some great questions. He's looking at it not from an Orthodox perspective, but just from whatever his thoughts are perspective. He was asking about natural law, and so the reason he asked me, would what Christians do be considered naturally good? At first, I thought, what is he asking? But then I realized what the intent of the question was, which is basically, if you say yes, then you have to admit into natural theology. But it's not about just trying to win the question or something. I genuinely don't think that the Christian, or even to make it more simple, the biblical way of life described is something you can just naturally know. There are elements of it in it. So if you're watching this, my friend from Indonesia, if you're watching this later, let me clarify one thing. There are some elements of the law in the Bible that are based on natural laws. For example, love your father and your mother. Pretty sure most animals, including human beings and other creatures, all love their parents. So that's something that can just be naturally known. But stuff like don't commit certain sexual sin, you can't naturally know that. Sorry. I just don't think there's a case for it.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that. Society needs laws, it needs codes of morality. I'm not saying that every human being is going to be an evil murderer without it, but we do have these laws for a reason, to guide people on the correct path. Because while some morality, again, is instinctive and natural, a lot of what we know was built upon foundations of civilization, foundations of belief, and even atheists, the ones who despise religion, they still operate on morality that's ultimately still sourced from Christianity, or if they're in the Muslim world, from Islam. But actually, it is funny we mention Islam in this, because I do believe Muslims say that we are all born Muslim apparently and have this natural desire to submit to God and follow his laws, but then it gets lost after 1 minute, and then you have to revert to Islam, which is why they call it reversion sometimes instead of conversion. So I think our Indonesian friend might be able to confirm this in the comments or whatnot.
Yeah, that's definitely weird of them. And if any of you have read Plato, you'll know that he believes that every human being is born a blank slate and they lost their memories of the upper heavenly realm and they have to regain those memories back. So that sounds really weird when Muslims will say something that sounds exactly like that. They'll go, oh, you used to be a Muslimeen when you were in the womb of God or something, and now you got to get it back. Now, again, I don't know if the Salafis and the hardcore traditionalists believe in that. I have to do some more research, quite frankly. But you can find loads of this stuff in Islamic philosophy. Now, Adriano says, you know what's funny? Theophilus of Alexandria in the late 4th century and some others in that time, the others you're mentioning are the monks of Egypt, that time took issue with Origen's teachings because he said that God the Father didn't have a body. Now, here's the thing. Body, Theophilus is very vague about that, so he doesn't necessarily mean that God has to look like a human flesh. However, he has a problem with Origen because Origen says that God is so above and beyond everything, so transcendent above that, that he does not ever come to material creation. So I think one of the reasons Theophilus and the monks overcorrect and react to him the way they do is because they're afraid that if you deny that God can take a body, then he can't come into the world. Because, like, what's he going to come into? Immaterial? No one's going to know where he is, right? So if you're going to believe in the incarnation, God has to be able to become material. And even if we're not including the New Testament, what about all the appearances of God in the Old Testament, such as the Tower of Babel? Like, how does he do that? Origen's God can't do that. So doesn't Islam have a form of determinism in that they have a form of the elect? Yeah, they don't believe in total free will, and they don't believe that God wants everybody to be saved.
Yeah, there are some statements that Muslims in the Middle East are very fatalistic, I guess you can say, because of this determinism, that everything is predestined by God. I think it can sometimes rub off the Middle Eastern Christians and Jews as well, but I'd also say much less so, which is also why in the Levant and in Egypt, Middle Eastern Christians, ironically, this is what might make them a bit more business oriented because they think they can take more risks and investments because they don't think it's all predetermined. Whereas Muslims in these countries, because they have a more fatalistic belief, I think they might not be as ambitious. But to be clear, humans are very fickle, very complex creatures. Yeah. I would not say this applies to Muslims in, Bilad al-Khalij. They are also not as fatalistic, not as deterministic with their morality.
I also think that's maybe also kind of like a folksy thing. So it's kind of like maybe that's not the way they're believing it is not what their theologians mean. So maybe it's just something that you see a lot in Syria and parts of Lebanon because just some Muslims have mixed it with local folk ideas of Islam. But like the hardcore Gulf Arabs, like you said, they don't think that they're unable to do stuff because of God. They'll just say, "Hey, I made $1 million. Guess what? God wanted me to do that." Like they'll just justify it the other way. They'll say, I can do anything and I'm going to do all this stuff and it's because God allowed me to do it. So they kind of view it the opposite way. Pretty interesting. Maybe it's because of all the wars and stuff in Syria and Iraq. It's just depressing. It's like, why try anything? It's all big.
Yeah. As I said, humans are fickle creatures. I guess the fact that the Levant has a lot of war, the Maghreb has a lot of war, but Bilad al-Khalij has a lot of oil, that could influence the determinism, fatalistic outlook. One thing I do want to discuss also, because you have this map of pagan Europe, is that when it comes specifically to, I guess, left-wing neo-pagans, this is a little off topic, but it's also going back to the core of the video.
Yeah.
And I find they're often reverse constructing or reconstructing a God that already believes in what they believe in. They think, Zeus says my political slogan, Hades says my political slogan, Freya says my political slogan. This is very particular amongst left-wing neo-pagans, and I already discussed how they try to incorporate feminism into their beliefs. I hate to say it, but your pagan gods are probably just as patriarchal, quote-unquote, or reactionary, quote-unquote, as the Abrahamic religions you despise. And it's very funny watching left-wing people try to crash on Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, or at least just Christianity. But almost every belief they have is just repackaged anti-Semitism or whatever.
Hey on Crooks, I gotta let in Joseph. Stay in if you'd like. I just forgot to add him in. Hey Joseph, how's it going? And what would you like to talk about?
Hey James. Hey, yeah, I appreciate your channel. I found you when I was coming out of Judaism. I was a prospective convert from Judaism. I've studied the Talmud for more than 5 years. Been to Israel and all of that. But I'm trying to figure out the difference between certain streams of mysticism within Orthodoxy. I found Orthodoxy in predominant Greek Orthodox neighborhood in Massachusetts. I now live on a Native American reservation. Long story how I got here. I'm not Native, but story short, I'm trying to figure out the different streams of true mysticism and the paganisms of the world. I also, back in that same city where I found Orthodoxy, there was a lot of Hindu temples, and I didn't know very much about Hinduism, but they had this temple where there was a mix in Hinduism and Judaism and that and Kabbalah and all of this, and it just really it threw me for a loop. And I'm just trying to the true mystic in Orthodoxy as distinguished from paganism.
Yeah, great question. So let me ask you to begin with, were you originally like born into Judaism, or were you a Christian who converted or was about to convert into it? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, when I was young, we had a Messianic congregation on the second floor of my church. It was a Russian congregation, and I was taken into that, pretty young in my Christian life, about 15 or so. So I've always been very acquainted with Judaism. I just, as I started to question things about Protestantism, started going into actual Judaism. So that's how I ended up there.
I see. Okay. So the thing with the Orthodoxy and the mysticism is you'll get a few different answers from people on the internet. And when I say people on the internet, I mean that because the internet, I think, has a lot of these extremes. So you have like some people who take one thing too far, others will take the other thing too far. In reality, the Orthodox spiritual method is not supposed to be a mimicry of philosophy, a mimicry of Plato or Plotinus. Some people try to make it out to be like that, but if you read Vladimir Lossky's book, he goes in very strong lengths to say, no, we don't believe in Plotinus's ecstatic union. We're not having an ecstatic, temperamental fit, and then we're going to blur into God's divine image. It's supposed to be something that takes a lot of time, and it's kind of like the maturity of the spirit or something. And so Orthodox mysticism, when not practiced by a monk, so practiced rather by the laity, just people who, might be married, live in their homes or whatever, is really just supposed to be taking some time away from secularism and the things that are in our world to focus on God and not think of God as suppositional. So what do I mean by that? I mean that there's two things that separate Orthodoxy from Western Christianity that make it quite different. And sometimes you see, by Western, we just mean Catholic and Protestant. Sometimes when you see some Roman Catholics will say, oh, Orthodox believe in Hinduism and stuff because of their mystical practices. But I think a lot of that is coped for the fact that the Orthodox don't believe in speculation. So again, on the internet, you're going to find a lot of Orthodox doing speculative, analytical theology and stuff. But if you really go to the places in the world where Orthodoxy is practiced, namely the Caucasus, Eastern Europe, parts of Central Asia, the way that people practice their religion and the way that theologians say it is for it not to be suppositional or analytical. So that means that we don't care about overly critiquing the scripture. We don't care about finding the exact genetic root of all the philosophical problems we have. Orthodox mysticism is supposed to be a focus on God despite everything else, whether it's intellectual or not, and to be focusing on a life that is consistent with the church and the scripture itself. So there is a limit to monasticism. You can't just do Hindu monasticism, for instance. And there's a limit to many other things. But yeah, not to hit a, what do I want to say? I forgot what I was going to say.
GM people in this chat are saying your audio is cutting out.
Oh, can you guys hear me now?
I hear you just.
All right. I'm going to wait 15 seconds to see if the chat can hear me. Maybe I was too far away. But to repeat what I had been saying, Joseph, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Just to kind of tap off everything I was saying, despite the fact that so many people on the internet try to make Orthodoxy analytical and suppositional, it's not supposed to be like that. And that's what makes it different from the other sects. Does that make some sense?
Yeah. I mean, there's a blurring of the lines otherwise.
Yeah, because we don't think that you can just empirically deduce everything. So we think that a lot of Protestants can get caught up in their own solipsism. So solipsism, this idea of being unable to prove the reality of your own consciousness and issues like that. Complex stuff, but the Orthodox don't think everybody needs a PhD in philosophy just to be a Christian, obviously.
Experience.
Yeah.
Experiential.
Experience over just studying, and revelation over speculation. So if God doesn't tell us something, we can't invent stuff. That's what the Orthodox believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. And I got to rewatch this because I missed it as well. So I'm going to start over after I get off.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Joseph, for calling in. Thanks,
All right.
you too.
Pleasure.
Okay, I think we're good. We covered a lot of good topics, and I'm going to head before it gets too late. Any closing remarks, Mr. Crook?
I would just say that I believe a lot of neo-paganism stems from people either being distraught with Christianity, particularly in Europe, and they want something to fill the void because atheism isn't for them. But for the people who want to talk about, oh, I'm going back to my traditions, you are effectively going off a reconstruction of a reconstruction. I hate to say it, but, at least maybe for Germanic paganism especially, you're going off of what Christians were saying. It's not so much a clear line compared to Greek and Latin neo-paganism. And for the ones that are more left-wing neo-pagans, you are just making a god that already agrees with you preemptively. So that's all I have to say.
Yep. And then some closing remarks on my end. Thank you very much for calling in, Mr. Crook. We'll see you next time. So some closing remarks on my end here. This book is The Origin of Pagan Idolatry by George Stanley Faber. And so if you're just joining, I'm going to recap the stream. I essentially talked about how the pantheons of European paganism are all based on the same Indo-European myths, which the Bible just calls Japheth. So if scientists say, oh, the Bible's wrong because of the Indo-European stuff, it's actually proving the Bible right, because the Bible does in fact believe in the fact that all of Europe, Russia, obviously, the Caucasus, Asia Minor, originally Persia, and down into Pakistan and India, are part of the same linguisto-cultural family, and modern science agrees with that. It's called the Indo-Aryan or Indo-European language family. Likewise, you have Ham and Shem as well. So we talked about those and how they corroborate with the scripture, and we talked about how Zeus is the same as Jupiter, who's the same as Odin, and all these are just retelling packages of the same stories. If you go far enough, you can also see in The Origin of Pagan Idolatry by George Stanley Faber, which I already mentioned, that a lot of the myths of the world that have something to do with the flood are packaged retellings of the story of Noah's Ark. And so you can see, if you actually read this book and check out some other material, that paganism is a weird construction of local rites, pan-European ideas, and also events inspired by what is recorded in the scripture. Or rather, events that are the events recorded in scripture, but they are inspiring some of the myths in paganism. So paganism is not just this isolated religion of Gaul, where you're a modern Frenchman, you say, I want to be a Gaul pagan. There is no, what are you going to look at? Because it's all connected. So the paganism of Gaul is related to the paganism of other Celts, which is related to the broader Japhethite Indo-European family, which itself takes some stuff from the experience of the Bible and repackages it. So where do we draw the line? Where is the ancestor stuff pure enough? Same applies to Semites and Hamites as well, but we didn't cover them in this topic because their paganism is quite different, as not nearly as unified as in Japhethite land, aka Europe, Caucasus, Persia. So thank you guys all for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I was in a weird room today, so the video quality wasn't that good. The audio went out a couple times, so ignore that and forgive me for that stuff. But thank you guys very much. And if I did not answer your questions, such as Joey from church, all right, Gmail, it was nice to catch a live stream. I sent you an email. Let me check that and reply to you. And please do come on to the stream at some point. So I invite everybody onto the stream. You don't have to be an expert in anything. But yeah, thank you guys very much. Let me play the closing video, and that'll be it.
Freakiness is a part of life. Original Baramonga along with the two bad, wicked youths of rap. Not a mercy, whoa. Yeah!
talk paper when I'm riding by. They know it's drizzle, he the truth off the east side. I know who ain't got my money because they ducking high. I grind for me and mines, I got the green light. I got to get it how I live it, that means front line. I got them zips, I got that soft, I got that hard white.